All right, guys. I was hoping there'd be some waves today, but it looks like there isn't. So I might go over turning a little bit since that's been discussed in the sub lately. So since there's no waves, let's do some turning tutorials. When it comes to turning and being a beginner skimmer, generally the idea is to turn the least amount necessary to ride the wave. So you should be going diagonal to shore and minimizing the amount of turn you do. Your first turns when you're learning should not be 180 degrees like you see pros doing on the internet. And aside from making sure that your turn has a smaller radius to it or bigger radius, another big thing is body positioning, leaning into the turn, turning your head and shoulders to the direction that you're going. So first mistake that we usually see people do is standing up too tall and leaning behind the wave. So let's get an example of that. So by standing tall, we eliminated the possibility of re-entering the wave. So let's correct that by leaning into the wave, dipping our shoulders and turning them into the direction we're turning, and slightly turning your head as well. But it's your body position that's going to carry you into a turn. Obviously, when you're practicing turning, you may be going later than you'd like if you're not fast enough yet, but you still want to eliminate smacking the wave and getting to it late. Try to, even learning on whitewash would be better. Learn to anticipate the turn before you hit it and make sure you're not smacking the wave and then falling behind it. Anticipate the turn, start early, and try to carry the momentum of the wave with you as you're going, instead of just smacking into it. As a beginner skimboarder riding smaller waves, you should be turning on your rail with the wave and not back on your tail. You shouldn't be dragging, your board shouldn't be going up yet, ideally. On your rail, leaning over with the wave. If you're a journeyman or intermediate skimmer, however, you're definitely going to want to learn how to turn off the tail only, riding up the wave. I don't have any good waves today, for example, but let's try to practice turning up into the wave, not using our rail so much, and using the idea of a snapping re-entry where you lean back, and then once you complete your turn at about 180, you immediately lean forward to try to re-enter off your snap. Something very common when you're a beginner skimmer is doing these run-ins, these speed runs, where you're not actually going for a wave. My beach is pretty flat today. Obviously it's better if you have a nice steep beach that helps you do it, but let's do a speed run turning on flat water, and let's try to see how low we can lean in and maybe drag our hand. We're going to use our inside hand to gauge how far we're leaning and able to turn into the water on your rail. Speaking of getting low while you're turning and dragging your hand to gauge how, another important thing while you're turning is to bend your knees and actively use your knees to set how low you can go and how deep your turn is. If you're skimming with your knees nearly locked straight, everything's going to be harder, your progression's going to be slower. Let's bend our knees real low, actively use them to manipulate our turn on the water. One last thing before we get out of here that I kind of mentioned earlier is that going early is ideal for when you're turning on rail and drawing the turn out. Going late is when you're forced to turn more off your tail, and that's when the re-entry is going to be difficult. So when you're beginning, I do recommend to do those long drawn out turns on your rail on smaller waves if you can go earlier, even just whitewash to get the momentum first. Then as you progress, you can do that turn on a late wave, because if you do the drawn out turn on a late wave, the lip is probably going to catch you, push the board off your feet, and you're not going to complete that turn. So the later you go, the straighter you go. If you're going early, draw it out nice and long and try to use the momentum of the wave.